I'll get to it. All right, guys. Oh, that's lovely.
You guys are supposed
We
to be
won't tell
friends.
her. We'll leave that. All right, guys. For those of you, Dave, Gary, that are looking to record, you guys can feel free to start your recordings. Just let me know. Chris, if you could go ahead and master mute. All right. Can everybody hear me, Chris, or whoever else is in here? Anybody else?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. All right, guys. So like to welcome everybody that has joined up with us to our Blindness 101 workshop. So I'm going to kind of give you guys just a real basic rundown, what we're going to cover, kind of the topics that we're going to look into. We have a few talking points. Those of you that were involved with our meeting last month are familiar with kind of the talking points that we're going to start. So we do have a few guest speakers that are going to talk on a few different points. And basically the way this is going to work is this is going to be very much like a town hall style conversation. So one of the reasons why we went over the meeting and the unmeeting, because that is going to be important later on, because we want folks to contribute to the conversation. So we can remind folks again as we move on with this, just kind of how to utilize the Zoom platform and go in and out. But we would ask that if you do unmute yourself, that you try to keep the background noise to as much of a minimum as possible, because we are recording this and we are also submitting this to a couple of different organizations outside of the participants here tonight. So with that being said,
Brian.
Yes,
I'm sorry. I just need to check something, and there's no other way to do it. Marge, can you hear?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's all I needed to do.
Awesome. Hi, Marge.
Hi.
Okay. All right. So kind of to get the ball rolling. So the question is, why do we decide to do something like this? So, I'm going to back the bus over a few other people for a change, and basically suggest that it wasn't my idea. No, but it is something that we have talked about multiple times over our existence as a chapter. We've been in existence for 5 years this past May. Yay.
Yeah.
But basically, one of the biggest topics that we run into very often is how do we as blind folks, and especially folks that are newly blind, because many of us in this chapter kind of fall into that category, how do we kind of fit into the grand scheme of things? How do we kind of take those first steps into a world that, quite frankly, scares the living what out of us? What resources are out there? What type of things should we be focused on? What help can we get from others who have gone through the same type of situations? What other things are we looking to do in our individual lives? Because we all share a lot of similarities, but we're all generally unique in our own way, in our hobbies, in our interests, in our, those that are still employed or seeking education or things like that. But even more than that, just in general independent living and advocacy and other things. So where we're going to kind of start this conversation is I felt like that when I was thinking about how best to go about this, I felt like the best way to go would to be build upon 3 basic tiers of coping. And my good friend and colleague, Kathy Kroner, is going to talk some about that in just a minute. But what a lot of this boils down to is there's 3 basic facets of kind of working through this particular situation, or the blindness situation, if you will. And it starts with the psychological aspects of it. Any of us who have been on this earth longer than 5 minutes have dealt with adversity in our lives. And one of the things that we know by going through this stuff is that very often things that take us out of our comfort zone can really put a lot of stress on us and can really affect our lives in a very, very profound way. And sometimes what often happens, just as in many other situations where there's, some sort of traumatic event that happens, there's a number of steps that we go through in kind of trying to deal with this and come to terms with this. And what many people don't tend to think about is how much the inner conflict plays into all of this, because there's a large number of people, there's a lot of people out there who kind of get stuck in this particular facet of, the stage of coping, and frankly never do anything with their lives. They sit around, they feel sorry for themselves, they live in a constant state of depression, denial, any other number of things. And it's really sad, because you really can't move on to the other stages of coping until you're able to get through this stuff. But I'm going to let my buddy Kathy here kind of talk about this a little bit, since I know she's kind of pressed for time. So Kathy, would you like to jump in, unmute yourself, and
Sure. So
you've got the calm.
I'm not that pressed for time, but I should probably sign off about 8:30, because anyway.
Okay. No problem.
So it's interesting. I'm not going to do like a lot of a formal presentation, but rather I was thinking a lot about this. I actually, my background is in social work, and I've actually written a little bit on this topic, not a tremendous amount, but a little bit of stuff. And, in essence, everybody's experience is really unique, but I did want to bring up just a few things. And by the way, is Derek on this call, just out of curiosity?
He will be, but he is not currently. He is going through a confirmation practice at the moment.
Okay. All right. That's right. So I wanted to bring up a few things that I think are really important when we're thinking about our experiences. And one of those things is like the age of onset, right? In which somebody experienced, sight loss, right? Whether total blindness or low vision, and actually, having said that, that's all like a controversial thing in and of itself, right? Like, how do you define blindness? And, anyway, we could talk a little bit about that too. But I think the age of onset is a critical thing to consider, because I think the experience of somebody being blind at birth might be a little bit different from somebody who, like myself, the onset of, vision loss was at age 13, whereas for some of the older folks that are on the call and are new members to the group, I think the age of onset was later, right? Later in life through different eye diseases and things as such. So I think that age of onset is really critical, because, for example, if you experience sight loss or blindness as a child, your parents or caregivers are going to really sort of influence that experience, right? If you take me at age 13 and you look at psychological theory, and if you do consider psychological theory, you may be familiar with Erik Erikson. He talks about sort of these psychosocial crises that come at different stages in our life, and sort of biology, sort of thrust us into these conflicts to resolve. So anyway, long story short, in adolescence, the big crisis that most teens are dealing with is identity versus role confusion, right? So to hear that you're losing your vision at 13 is, nothing's good at 13, right? Like, nothing's good in those middle high school years. Well, some things are good, but, everything's a crisis. And, so the different kinds of things that I grappled with, were different than what maybe Chris grappled with, or what, I don't know everybody on the call, but others may have grappled with. So I think that age of onset is really important. I think the etiology or the origin of how one became blind is also really important to consider, because blindness might be one thing along with another you know, along with another, in some ways, trauma, right? Like if you were blinded from war, you've got a couple of different things to consider. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. I gotta look at my notes here. Hold on here. All right. So etiology, age of onset. Oh, and prognosis, right? That can make some difference as well. So anyway, just as a starting point. So we all deal with these things very differently. If you think about Kubler-Ross's stages of loss, you know, she basically talks about these 5 stages of loss, right? And her research was largely done in the field of death and dying, but you know, loss is loss. And so those 5 stages generally include denial, anger. There's this bargaining stage, and that's the stage where you're like, oh, dear God, you know, if you just restore my sight, I swear I'll go to church like, you know, 5 times a day and, you know, and give all my money to charity, whatever. And then often that's preceded by depression and then ultimately acceptance. And when I think about my own journey, denial led my life for a long time. And actually, there's a lot of productivity in denial, right? So at 13, I did not want to hear that I was losing my vision. And so, you know, kind of not recognizing that, you know, had some positive benefits, right? It made me continue just to keep moving forward. Now, I did, you know, I don't know how much of my journey, you know, to get into. I'd rather, I like to engage us all, and then maybe I can come back to that. But then when I realized at some point this wasn't going away, like it motivated me to do more, right? Like I felt like not only did I have to be equal to my peers, I had to surpass my peers. And probably that's what drove me to get my doctorate degree, which actually adds another issue, another layer of sort of like psychological struggle to you know, being blind. And that was when I got accepted into this doctoral program. I couldn't help but think like I was a quota, like I was, you know, like fulfilling a category. And then what was really interesting is my doctoral class started out with, there were 12 people that started. We ended up, 7 of us ended up completing it. Another woman that was in my doctoral class was deaf. And it was really interesting because what accommodated her didn't work for me and vice versa, but it all worked out. But here's the interesting thing. When we took our comprehensive exams, only 2 people.
Kathy, I think you muted yourself by accident.
Yes. Chris,
Oh,
you
there you go.
muted me. You had enough of me, Chris. And you.
Oh, no. You know better than that, Kathy. I'm sorry. I was trying to figure out who was blowing into their phone. Go on.
So I don't know where it was, but again, like I think I was talking about my friend who was deaf, and we passed
Yes.
our friend, the only people, right? So of course, you know, we were like, oh man, they're like all worried that the ADAs are like, you know, going to come after them if they don't pass us. You know, I had a really great mentor, and I said, all right, like I don't get it. Like, how come Carol and I were the only people who passed? And she said, you're the only people that really worked hard. You were the only people that were prepared. And again, I think this is a really large piece of some of the positive things that can come from, you know, in some ways deficits, and that's resiliency, right? I mean, I look at the people in this chapter and I think, oh my gosh, these are like resilient people. Like, you know, if I was like going to be on a desert island, whatever, I choose you guys above and beyond, you know, my, you know, physics colleagues, right? I mean, because there is something about that resiliency and ways to think creatively And, Darwin talked all about adaptation, and he talked about it wasn't the strongest that survived, it's the people that are most able to adapt, that really, that survive, excel, and those kinds of things. Now, having said all that, all those positive things, Brian's right? Like, I'm in a good place in my journey. And again, I just want to clarify, it wasn't for probably like a decade or something that I really felt comfortable being blind and I could accept that part of my identity. And it's like, once you're able to hit that level, it's great, right? Like, I have the best stories from all these crazy things that I got into just because I couldn't see, right? I've met all these wonderful people because I've had to be somewhat dependent, so it afforded me the opportunity to expand my world. Anyway, let me just stop there for a second. And I'd really like to kind of engage us all in a conversation around our own experiences. So.
Very good, Kathy. So, so with some of that stuff in mind, again, as we kind of touched on a little bit when we started this, each and every one of us has either gone through something, an experience similar to that which Kathy had just described, or in some cases, many of us are here because we currently are going through this particular process. And so what I would like is for somebody to kind of either touch on either or, kind of where they are now versus, or have they gone through it, and just kind of touch on their experiences a little bit. So would anybody like to shoot in? Again, if you want to raise your hand, or mute, unmute, whatever you want to do. All that I would ask is that anybody that jumps in, please state your name before you start.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Okay, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So basically what we're just looking for is just kind of expanding on like what Kathy was talking about regarding kind of the coping, the psychological coping, kind of how you go through the process, those of us that have been through it, and also those of us that currently are going through it. If you would like to share some of those experiences and kind of talk a little bit about that, or heck, even ask questions about it, what kind of where you are with it.
Gary Legates. I
Gary,
can't talk
yep.
about the blindness part very well because I've always been blind, but I can talk about when I lost all the hearing in my left ear, that denial that she was talking about. I went through that. When the doctor told me, you got a tumor and you've got to have it operated on, my first thought was, I'm not doing it. I'm mad. I'm not doing it. It's ridiculous. This can't be happening. And it took me a little while to calm down enough to realize you've got to get this done. And if I hadn't got it done, I wouldn't be here talking to you guys today. But so that denial is a very real thing that people do, that at least I went through, even though I've been handicapped all my life. When an additional handicap was laid on me, I did definitely go through that denial.
That's great, Gary. And you're right. And it is a very powerful, and I'll share just something kind of from my own life, but also just from some of the other folks that I've talked to. One of the most common experiences, Gary mentioned being blind since birth, but, a lot of us talk about the transitional blind, which many of us, as we said before in this particular chat, are. And one of the things that I come across very, very often, more times than I can probably even count now that I think about it, is like Kathy and Gary both had talked about, is just the idea of the denial and how powerful of an agent that is, because you will have people that you will encounter that very, very clearly physically manifest the different facets of blindness. And yet, for whatever the reason, they tend to just want to, because they fear this labeling, and that's another big key facet of this that people tend to get stuck in the whole denial phase of this, is they're concerned about the labeling. How do people perceive me? How do people, look at me? I don't want to be looked at differently. I don't want to be, looked at as somebody who's incapable or, of doing things. And by virtue of that particular point, what a lot of people wind up doing is just flat out not using the tools that they clearly need to compensate for the loss of their vision. And one of the most common things, and I know because I've been through it, I can guarantee you Suzanne, Kathy, a few of you others have been through it, is whilst trying to come to terms with this, we are introduced to the cane, which is the blind person's best friend, as many of us know. And, especially as the teenage, in the teenage years, like Kathy was talking about, I know I started taking orientation mobility training back when I was about the same age. And one of the things that, I kind of had to struggle with was I was fine doing the orientation mobility lessons when it was just me out with the teacher and, I wasn't around my classmates. I wasn't around anything like that. But, it was like trying to twist an arm to get me to do it virtually any other time. Either I would just default to a sighted guide, or I just would try to wing it and act like I could do it maybe apprehensively, but I would try to feel my way through and try to work my way through. What I realized very quickly, and in some cases very painfully, and I mentioned this to a few of you before, there are a couple of truths about blindness. Number one, blindness is a full contact sport. So that being said, one of the things that often happens is that it may be a full contact sport, but we can diminish the amount of pain and bruises and things that go along with it. So what was inherently happening was, by not using the cane, I was falling over things for reasons other than I'm just naturally klutzy on my feet to begin with. So you come to the realization pretty quickly after a few bumps and bruises that, hey, this is just stupid. Why am I risking my own safety? And I was very fortunate because I never have had any serious injuries as a direct result of that. So some people, I've heard stories of folks that have actually not been as fortunate. And it comes down to personal safety and worrying about it. But something else I told a group that I spoke to a while back with Change Incorporated, and that was, we're all concerned about how people perceive us. I mean, every person on this earth worries about that at some point or another to varying degrees. But when it comes to labeling, there's one simple truth that's involved with labeling that I think, works in this particular instance. As blind individuals, we're going to be labeled one way or the other, no matter how much we think we're going to avoid it, no matter how much we deny it. We're going to be labeled, and it's going to happen one of two ways. Either we're going to not use the tools at our disposal in order to save face and wind up face planting, and then the natural reaction is going to be, well, hey, what are you, blind? You missed a curve, or you tripped over this, or you tripped over that. And they're going to do that to a sighted person too, even jokingly. So that label is going to be thrown out regardless, number one, plus you get a nice little mark to go along with it. Or you can do it the smarter, safer way, which is to kind of accept the situation for what it is, utilize the tools that are at your disposal, and try to educate those around you to perceive you in a in a profitable and a meaningful way, while still maintaining your personal safety. So that's a big one that I often come across with that. So somebody else like to jump in?
Chris?
So
my experience, which I guess leads me to a question for Kathy and anybody else who might want to answer it. I've found that one of the biggest challenges that pretty much every blind person I know, including myself, faces in the process of accepting one's blindness and coming to terms with it is the social stigma around blindness, which you, Brian, brought up in a way. And it's just that perception, but it's also how will they treat me? Will they accept me in an a normal or ordinary social space that doesn't have anything to do with blindness? Now, like Gary and Ninette, I've been totally blind since birth. So there was no faking it for me. There never has been. I didn't even have the ability to fake it if I wanted to. So, as far as that part, I didn't really have a choice, but I did and still do at times have to deal with the insecurities surrounding social stigma and how to be accepted. It's a human thing. We all want to be accepted, but this blindness thing is now another hurdle. So I'm wondering, and this would be a question to Kathy and anybody else who wants to jump in, how did you handle those social situations as you were losing your vision, and how did that impact your journey toward coming to terms with your blindness?
So, Chris, that's a fantastic question. And I've often thought about you in terms of, your experience in college, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, I start out a lot of particularly my first and second year classes by asking the group, like, oh, how many of you know someone who's blind?
Mm-hmm.
And if I have 25 students in my class, every once in a while I'll get a hand and somebody will tell me about like their grandparent that lost their vision. And I'm like, oh, well, good. Okay, so now like I'm the first person then that you've met that's blind. And like, people are kind of like looking at me, but then they get it because my eye contact is so poor. And believe me, it doesn't take long for them to get it because, I like, it's hard to get people's names, and I'll call Black students like I think they're a white person, and some of them men or women, like it's all. But so let me just say, with the social stigma, first of all, that's part of the problem. No one knows people that are blind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit different. Like at McDaniel, we have a big deaf community, so there's like some camaraderie and things like that. But most of the time, if we have a student that's blind that comes to campus, they make it for about a year because nobody knows how to interact with that person. So that is a very, very real thing. And it's a very real thing. Now I think, and hopefully this is happening for you, that is, well, now it doesn't because of what the world we're living in, but I think as you get to do projects with people and things like that, and people get to know you, personally, hopefully that social stigma decreases. But, so I don't know how to answer that, Chris, other than to say like, it's very real. And of course that was for me, like at your age, my biggest thing was I could let some of my, I had to, by the time I was in college, like it was pretty obvious that like I couldn't read print, I couldn't, there's a lot of things I couldn't do. But I was really worried about like the whole romantic partner thing, like, saying to somebody, yeah, I have this limitation or whatever. And here was the weird thing. I actually went to this psychologist, like I was with Voc Rehab at the time, and they're like, yeah, why don't you go, get a little counseling? I'm like, okay. So I did. They recommended somebody. This probably would also drew me further into counseling. And he's like, just do this. I'm like, well, if I could just do that, I'd be doing that. Like I wouldn't be here. But it's not that easy. But I think you know, I just can resonate with that whole thing. But, you know, I also think that sometimes we don't give people as much credit because, like, in the end, I think once people get over the awkwardness of, I don't know what to do, should I help you, should I not, should I, you know, like, I think once people get over the awkwardness of it all, like, you know, then everything's just kind of regular, you know.
Mm,
um
you would hope.
but I'm interested. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'm a little puzzled by this. You said that a lot of the students, I mean, the blind students who come don't stay. Is that what you said?
No, I was saying most of the, I was saying that we don't do well really at McDaniel with blind students. They stay for about a year and then they leave. It's not the academics that's the issue. It's the socialization.
No, I
Like,
understood I think I understood what you meant. I'm just puzzled that they don't stay because we know a number of blind people who have gone to college, and most of them have completed it. And in fact, of course, we were at that same college, and we both, you know, stayed there. So I just wonder what's different now. Okay, anyway, I was just
yeah,
a little
I mean,
puzzled by that.
by the way, were you guys there at the same time?
Gary and I were there together, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that obviously helped, but it didn't mean, I don't think it made the difference for us whether we would have stayed or not. I think either one of us would have stayed regardless of that.
Yeah. But, you know, it's interesting, Ninette, because I can't, the statistic around blind people that complete college is like 35% to the sighted student.
I'm going to guess that when we came through, that was much higher. What do you think, Gary?
I guess maybe it was. We didn't have the help that they have now. Now they have those offices for handicapped students and all that. We have nothing. We had to do it all ourselves. You know, we had to take it upon ourselves to go to the professors, find out what books they were going to use 6 months in advance and all that kind of stuff. We had no help that kids have today. Maybe that toughened us up. Maybe that's why we stuck it in.
Well,
Paloma?
Yes, Aloma.
Well, I was going to say, there's several things here. One is, I think Gary's right, to a certain extent. It maybe did toughen him up. And that is that this all stems from your confidence in yourself. Now, you have to go through transitions of blindness and losing vision. You have to get to the point where you think you're going to be okay. You're going to be in charge, not it. And you have to get to the point where you're okay to say, I'm a blind person. You have to get to the point where you stop relying on vision when it is no longer safe and effective and efficient for you to use just because you're too afraid to be a blind person and to use a non-vision technique. So you have to sort of go through a lot of those stages and pieces. And for some people, that's 30 days, and for some people, it's 30 years. We've all known people that have said, oh my God, I wish I'd found out about you guys 25 years ago. And so these transitions are critical. But the ultimate piece that makes it work is the transition that you find in yourself. And when you find that you have the confidence that you need, and not just the confidence, but the knowledge to know how to figure things out. And this is where what Gary said is true, that, you know, part of the problem is now we have students and people of all age groups, actually, but we have people who are really getting used to having things, I won't say handed to them, but the expectation level is higher than it was for a lot of us years ago. And so when Ninette and Gary went to college, and when I went to college, we had to look for our own solutions. And that meant we had to think ahead a little bit of some other people and figure it out before the semester even began, things like that. I'm not trying to just focus on students, but you you have to be able to recognize within yourself how you can address this. And other people around you will take those clues from you. But if you don't know to go to your professor and say, I need you to speak out loud whatever it is you're writing on the board, or something simple like that. If you don't know to do that, you're going to get completely run over as a student, and you're not going to do well. And this goes the same thing for work. And quite frankly, I love when Kathy brought up personal relationships. That's a huge barrier for a lot of blind people. Either they think they can't relate, or they won't be attracted by or to somebody who's sighted, or I must have somebody who's sighted because I need them to take care of me and then they can always drive, or I must have a blind person because they will know what it's like to be blind, and so we're going to be a good match. Or no, I don't want to be with another blind person because there's too many other things that I might need from a sighted spouse or partner. And so all of those things are huge when it comes to personal interrelationships. And for Kathy to talk about that starting at 13, what a horrible peer group age to try to deal with some of this.
Amen.
Charles Beeble.
Hi. Oh, sorry.
Charles first, and then Robin.
Oh, here we go.
Go ahead, Charles. No.
Also remember too, the social aspect, that you do the best you can, and not everybody is going to accept you or like you no matter what you do. And I mean, sometimes it does happen. Like when I try to get us on the radio, not everybody's going to jump and have us on as much as I would like to. But I do the best I can, and that's all I can do.
Very good. Robin?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. Hi, my name is, does everyone know me, or do I need to introduce myself?
Oh, go ahead, introduce yourself. Why not?
Okay, my name is Robin Hughes. I'm a museum professional from the Baltimore area, and I grew up in Carroll County. I have a master's degree in German Jewish history from Baltimore Hebrew University, and I was a visiting graduate student at Harvard University. I've lived abroad. I'm currently transitioning my career because of the pandemic, and I'm going to become a French Braille consultant. That's my goal. And what I wanted to add to this conversation is that from the time I was 2 years old, growing up in Carroll County, with a congenital genetic anomaly that affected most of my organ systems, including my eyes, and therefore my vision. I was born with a severe visual impairment and grew up using a cane and reading Braille from the time I was 2, as well as learning to use video magnified print. But my primary reading mode was medium was Braille. And for me, my growing up was a bit different, how visual impairment and the transition to blindness was approached, because for me, I was very fortunate that Gary was a publicly known figure. He granted newspaper interviews. So he was this mysterious icon that I literally grew up with from the time I was 2 years old. My vision teachers, I had 2 of them growing up, they taught me all about Mr. Legates. Mr. Legates, from the time I was 2. Mr. Legates reads Braille. And sorry?
Me 3.
Mr. Legates reads Braille. Mr. Legates went to a place called college. Mr. Legates had to work hard to do that. Mr. Legates now uses his brain to teach people a language called Latin and another language called French. And you're bright like Mr. Legates, and therefore you're going to do those things too. You don't need to teach Latin and French, but we do expect you to learn Braille and to excel in school, go to college, finish college, and then use your intellect to do some good for the world. And of course, I was aware that there were issues with having a visual impairment, and potentially it was known that I was eventually, because I grew up with congenital glaucoma, and the medical results of the complications of that. So it was always assumed that I would lose my vision. But because I had Mr. Legates, now who I know is Gary now, because I had that model, I didn't realize that other people, because I grew up in I was mainstreamed. So I didn't know that people had all of these issues, negative issues surrounding visual impairment and blindness. I just thought that what it was to have blindness was just simply to be fluent in other languages. Oh, and also Stevie Wonder helped. You know, I saw him on television. He was a multimillionaire, and you know, all the other entertainers with blindness. So, you know, I just didn't realize I wasn't exposed to all of this negativity that I hear in the, you know, people frequently in the adult low vision community now that I'm associated with it. I just never was exposed to any of that. So I didn't know that I was supposed to be intimidated or I was supposed to feel scared. For me and for my family and for my friends and teachers, everything was always focused on me using my intellect to do some good for the world.
Great. That's great. Brian, just real quick, I want to, and that's really good, Robin, so we appreciate that. I want to circle back to something that Chris kind of touched on a little bit regarding social stigmas just for a second. A lot of what has been said, again, I can kind of relate to, especially as a teenager going through kind of the awkwardness, just not only as a teenager, but also a teenager with a visual impairment. But I think what really hit the point home was several years later, as many of you know, I have a son, he's fully grown now. But basically, I had a conversation with him several years ago, and it wasn't necessarily directly about blindness, but it related to my particular situation, and it basically pressed upon me the epiphany of the subject matter, and that was this. He came to me one day and he said, you know, Dad, I've got this guy in school, and, you know, he's bullying me, and he's picking at me, and he's doing this and he's doing that. And, you know, it was a whole laundry list of things. And one of the things that I told him, and just as we kind of got to talking about it, and I said, you know, I got to thinking back on kind of my experiences, because I'm sure, like many of you, when I was growing up through school and as I was coming of age, people that didn't understand things either, you know, shortchanged you in one manner or another, in the best case of scenarios, in the worst case scenarios, just outright bullied you. And one of the things that I was telling him was I said, as I grew up, I began to realize the absurdity of kind of dwelling on rather something that kind of really in the grand scheme of things doesn't mean anything anymore. And I told him, I said, you know, when you go back and you look at the people that you go to school with, the friends that you make, the true friends that you make, and there's only going to be a select few of them. And it's kind of sad to look at it that way, but it's the truth. I mean, you really only come through with a few true friends at the end of the day. But conversely, the same people that are going to go through school and ride you about a given situation, whether it's a disability, whether, you know, it's intellectual, whatever the case may be, more often than not, by the time you realize it, they're gone, they're done, they're out of your life. And so what wound up happening in my particular case was it led me to a bigger revelation. And that is one that I kind of walk through life as sort of like my own psychological mantra. and that is this. As far as I look at the world, there are very, very few people in this world whose opinion, perception, what have you, I take with any gravity whatsoever. The vast majority of people, and that's not to say that I'm mean to people or I won't talk to people or I'm more than happy to bring people into a circle or something like that, but the vast majority of people at the end of the day, are passers-by, for lack of a better term. They're going to pass by. They're going to say, they might interact with you briefly. You might see them in passing here and there at, the store or something like that. But the vast majority of them don't hold a whole lot of weight in the grand scheme of your life. And even more to the point of that is when you really get down to it and you stop and think, if people go back and take like inventory of personal relationships, you go down the list of people, your parents, your spouse, your children, and, your close-knit friends. You start getting into, your extended family, second, third, fourth cousins, twice removed, whatever, old work acquaintances or things like that. And you sit there and you go, well, I don't really talk to them that much, or I don't, they don't really reach out to me. And, I know a lot of people in this world that stress over those type of things, but at the end of the day, personal relationships are a two-way street. And again, at the end of the day, you really only are going to have a select few that are really going to do that. And kind of bringing it back to the conversation of blindness, many of those people in my particular situation are that way too, because they understand my situation, they've encouraged me through my situation, and they support me. And support comes in many, many different forms. It can be, as was mentioned before about, offering a ride from time to time. But I think for me personally, the most important support that I get is just the moral support, the backing, kind of the for lack of a better term, the cheerleading, if you will, the encouragement to keep pushing forward with this. Because there's plenty of examples out there. Many of them are right here, right now, as far as, what can be accomplished if we persevere through, the situation that's been thrust upon us. But it's important to have that support group, the support circle, your friends, groups like this one, the Federation, other groups like the Seymour, just people out there that are going through the same type of thing. I think for me personally, that is probably the single most important aspect of trying to get through the psychological aspects of dealing with this, with the situation. So with that being said, do we have any more questions or comments before we kind of move the conversation along?
All right, so I'll just conclude with saying this because I'm still thinking about like the Gary and Ninette and oh my gosh, Alana, no, not Alana.
Aloma.
Aloma, right. So I also was in school before the ADA, and you just had to figure it all out, right? I mean, somehow, like, I had to take statistics. I think about that all the time. There wasn't a calculator big enough. Whatever. Conceptually, I got it, but I mean, I'm not going to be your statistician, that's for sure. But I also, so I do think there was this whole piece of, where we had to be a little bit, really test our resiliency and creativity. But at the same time, I don't want to shortchange like the youth, because like, even like right now for like Chris and Derek and Meredith and anybody who's in school, I mean, everybody is challenged by all this online stuff, but I'm coming at it from this professor end, and like, it's hard. Like, it's really complicated. And what that boils down to, again, is, we just have to keep thinking creatively and, pull out that resiliency. And so I guess I just didn't want to kind of shortchange Chris or even Brian. Brian's in college too. Anybody else's trials and tribulations, because it's okay, we have an ADA, but it's still not perfect. So
Absolutely.
anyway.
Absolutely.
Paloma?
All right. Aloma, yes.
I just want to follow up what Kathy said, and that is, excuse me, and that is that part of the reason some students, we're talking about students here as a specific example, but this applies to almost anything in life. But
Yeah.
part of the reason some people do a little bit better is because they have a support network, they have peers, they have people they can go to. And it's different to go to another blind student or another blind electrician or another blind chef
Mhm.
or another blind dog trainer or, you know, vet groomer or what, you know, pick any profession. It's different to go to another blind person who's had those experiences and who shares those. And that is different than going to a service that is designed to provide something for you. You
Yes.
taking it upon yourself
Yes.
to get the information and share it. But not only that, people ask all the time, why should I belong to the Federation? Why should I care? Look, you know, we talk about state conventions and we talk about letter writing campaigns, and there's some politics, and we get together and have coffee, and you know, we do fundraisers. Well, the point of all of this is because we pay it forward.
Mm-hmm.
30, 40, 50 years ago, somebody and I mostly know who it is, but I mean, a lot of people names.
You're brave to admit
People,
that out loud.
people did things that made our lives easier.
Mm-hmm.
There's somewhere we did not have a particular type of discrimination, whatever it is or would have been. It didn't happen because somebody long before us fixed it. And so not only are we in this organization because we like each other, we learn from each other, we get ideas and share resources from each other. Even if it's, I need to find out about a blind guy who you know paints houses in California. No matter what it is, we also are paying it forward, and we have a little bit of an obligation to do that because not because we're blind and we owe the world and the world doesn't owe us, but we have a little bit of an obligation because somebody else did it for us.
Good point.
And that's a very, very, very good point. You know, just with the Federation and the blindness community as a whole is very much a symbiotic relationship with one another in every way that you just listed. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Would I like to add anything else? Because I think that this conversation and kind of the points that are brought up roll very well into our next topic of conversation, which is advocacy and kind of adaptation, which gets into the prospects of, you know, now that you've kind of sort of come to terms with the fact that you are blind and that, you know, you're going to have to learn how to live with this in order to have a decent quality of life and to be able to procure your education, your employment, whatever. So now you're going to sit there and you're going to wonder, well, what do I do next? You know, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm motivated. I've got the ideas in my head. What am I going to do? So Aloma is actually going to touch on a couple of things regarding advocacy. So,
Hey. All
hey.
right. Well, hi, everybody. I think I do know most people on the call. I'm Aloma Bama, and I'm in the Greater Baltimore chapter. And I have been around NFB since before any of you. So, which doesn't mean I know any more than the rest of you. Just means I'm older. But it does mean I've done a lot of things, and I've seen what works and what doesn't work, and I've seen the value of what we do. So advocacy is a key element in what we do in this organization. And by the way, we're not the only organization that focuses on advocacy. You know, a union is an advocacy group. The National Association of Dentists is an advocacy group for dental regulations or whatever the hell dentists deal with. So, so advocacy is a common thing to anybody, through career, through their profession, through their schools. PTA is an advocacy group, all of that. And so it's a piece that is designed, it's an element, not a piece, it's an element. Advocacy is an element that is designed to promote and protect. That's basically what it does. It promotes ideas and things, and it protects the individuals that need those ideas and things. And so we talk about advocacy in a couple of different ways. One is self-advocacy, and one is advocacy on behalf of someone else. So I'm not sure which one you want me to start with, or if you have a preference, Brian, I can go either way.
Well, since we talked about interpersonal conflict, why don't we start with self-advocacy?
Okay. All right. Now, the first thing I'm going to say then, some of you are not going to like, because it is difficult to be a successful, you can be a strong self-advocate, but it is difficult to be a successful self-advocate unless you have the resources for you to learn what you need to back you up, and for, quite frankly, for you to know what you're talking about. You can be a self-advocate in a lot of ways that might be very harmful. So you need to recognize that to be a successful self-advocate, what that means is that you are paying attention to not only what is good for you, but of course, then eventually what is good for other people. So can you be a successful self-advocate without having any confidence in what you're talking about? That's not possible. You can be a self-advocate and not know enough, but you can't be successful at it. You have to gain the intuition, the skills, the knowledge, the patience, the comfort level to generate information on your own behalf. And that might mean self-advocacy to a professor. It might be self-advocacy to an employer. It might be just simply learning how to write a letter to somebody. And that is not easy to do, especially in this day and age when nobody writes letters anymore. But there are things that must still be done in that manner. Charles is a really, really strong self-advocate. And he's not only a self-advocate, but he's an advocate for other people. He's got fabulous connections and ties, and his special commitment is to try to get the word out to the public. And that is a very, very strong advocacy skill. And Charles is one of the best at it. But he couldn't do that if he didn't know what he was talking about. And he couldn't do it for anybody else unless he could do it for himself first. So now, what kinds of things do you advocate for or about? Well, all right, let's go down some of the blindness list. You are a self-advocate when, let's do it that way. You are a self-advocate when a landlord says he cannot rent to you because you have a dog, a guide dog. Or a landlord says, the only apartment I have is on the 3rd floor and my insurance won't let me let you go up and down stairs. That's self-advocacy. Or when an employer says, I can't hire you because I won't have anyone that I can spare who can show you where the restroom is when you need to go. That's self-advocacy. Or when you you get a letter from the wonderful Social Security Administration that says, you owe us $25,000. Here's an enclosed check envelope. Please pay up. Now you could get help with that. I'm using that one as a little bit of a comical example because it's extreme. But the point is, you have to be able to think about the things in life that you need to stand up for. You know, advocacy is what happens when you get on the bus and the bus driver says, I need 6 people to move so this blind person can sit in this designated seat because that's where they're obligated to sit. Well, no, that's not true. That's not the law. That's not the regulation. That's not the policy. That's not true. So you need to be able to self-advocate for that. And if you want to sit there, fine. But if you don't, you have to know how to address that. You have to know how to address, I'm in a restaurant and they don't have any Braille menus. Okay, that's all right. But I'm sorry, we don't have any time to have someone come and read through the menu with you. I'll just tell you a couple things that we have and you'll have to make up your mind. No, it doesn't work that way. So self-advocacy are all of those times when things happen that you know just don't feel right. They're just not right. But you can't help fix them unless you have resources or experiences or networking and knowledge and the confidence in yourself to know how to do that. And I still say writing a letter, I want to go back to that because that's a huge thing. We do a lot of advocacy in this organization. And a lot of people think a great deal of it is political. Now, I'm going to hear a little bit, Brian, if that's okay, and start talking about the more organizational advocacy, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know how I'm doing for time, but
you're doing all right.
All right. So we consider ourselves a civil rights and advocacy organization. It is flat out right there in our definition of who we are and our mission. And we are an advocacy for the blind, meaning as a whole, meaning I'm an advocate when I need to be for Brian or for Chris, or Kathy is an advocate for me when she needs to be and I need her to be, something along those lines. But in addition to that, I'm an advocate for somebody who is a blind person that I've never met. And I am an advocate for a blind person who is in another state. And I'm an advocate for a blind person who doesn't have the experience to protect themselves, to do enough self-advocacy on their own. Now, an advocacy takes several different turns here. So a lot of what we do is politics. I mentioned that a minute ago. And that's a common thing. People think about advocacy and politics. So we do a lot of that. But that's by definition what an advocate is, for one thing. It's our job as individuals and as organizational advocates and self-advocates to look out and protect what are the best things, best options, and best opportunities for blind people in this country. And it's up to us, because some people are just not going to get involved and they're not going to know what to do. So we have to take that role. We have to be the advocates for the people who cannot advocate for themselves. And that might be a political issue. It might be a health department it might be an MTA transportation issue. It might be, here's one that people don't think about sometimes. You go to the grocery store, right? And you go to the customer service desk if you're by yourself and you say, excuse me, could I have some assistance in shopping, please? I know you're busy. I don't mind waiting. I'll step over here. And if it takes 20 minutes, that's okay, because I know you're busy. On the other hand, don't try that at 5 o'clock on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, because you'll never get anybody. So being courteous is one thing, But you want to be an advocate in the grocery store, because now what happens when the grocery store manager says, we don't provide service, we're a warehouse, we don't do this for anybody. You have to go pick up what you need off the shelves, out of the boxes and the bins yourself, because that's what everybody has to do. So we don't have to do it for you. So now you're in this situation where, how do I advocate for this? Are we asking for something different and something exceptional or something special because we're blind? Or are we just asking for equal access to the cans and the products that are on the grocery store shelves? And if they don't provide service for anybody else, do they have to do it for us? That's advocacy. Solving a grocery store problem is advocacy. So when you think about trying to improve things, protect things, change things in the lives of blind people, and when you think about your own life, what is it that you want to stand up for? You know, we talk about advocacy a lot, but there's an awful lot here that relates to principles and values and ethics and what you want to stand up for. And you have to stand up in life and be counted. And that means sometimes you have to speak up for yourself and be an advocate for yourself or somebody else. And if you don't know how to do it, we've got 50,000 people out there that we can get you in touch with that can help you learn how to do it. And I can't stop. I'll stop in a minute, Brian, but I can't stop unless I bring in this story, Christopher, because Chris knows all about advocacy because he started learning it when he was about 12 by working through NFB and going to Washington and visiting legislative offices and getting a sense of what kind of things advocacy really means and how it's done and how to be successful at it. And that's the other thing that we do, is we pass that along too.
Awesome. Very good. Very good. Excellent points put out there. And one of the things,
I think she was telling a story.
Did she go? Did we lose her?
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
What'd you say?
Did you just?
I said, I think you were in the middle of the story, and then Brian thought you were done.
No, I stopped.
Okay.
It's okay.
Wake up, Chris. No, and there's some, like I said, really, really good points there, Loma, and I thank you very much for that. And one of the things that kind of ties in with all of this, and it's kind of why we categorize kind of the advocacy and the adaptation, the two A's, if you will, together, is because, like Aloma had kind of said, a lot of the adaptation that comes from learning to live as a person with blindness has to do with either the self-advocacy or the group advocacy. So when we start talking about adaptation and kind of the different aspects of that, a lot of the points that Aloma made kind of fall into this. So just to kind of start off with, one of the most key facets of learning to adapt to your surroundings is learning how to do orientation and mobility. And that comes in on a multitude of levels. We talk about cane travel. You hear that a lot. We talk about environmental awareness. We talk about learning how to map routes or how to use transportation. And much of this, the advocacy that Aloma spoke of, falls into these categories because these are all basic necessities that we all have to go through. And oftentimes, well, a lot of times, it's not always as simple as we would like it to be. Many of us here in Carroll County know, and I beat this drum very often in the context of our meetings, about our transportational system and kind of, I guess more importantly, and Suzanne would probably concur with this, the lack thereof. And so there is yet another example of some outreach and advocacy that we do. Mr. Legates and myself both serve on the Transit Advisory Council for Carroll County because we are trying to help to improve the public transportation situation here in the county for not just ourselves, although there is a little of that, but just for everybody in general, because we see the things that the politicians and the decision makers don't regarding usability, viability, as far as people being able to function on their day-to-day lives, whether it's go to a job or go through, you know, an educational institution, or heck, even going to the grocery store so that you can walk up to the customer service desk and have somebody help you shop or something like that. So there's a number of different adaptational categories that exist out there. And like I said, I touched on one. Another one, of course, that ties very, very heavily into this, which we'll get to in a minute, is independent living. But something else that kind of crops up in a lot of instances is also supplementary situations. In other words, situations that are tied somewhat to the blindness condition, but maybe not every blind person has to deal with, or maybe they don't even know that they're dealing with something supplementary or something like that. And that can also throw kind of a curveball, if you will, into the kind of the psychological understanding and the advocacy understanding, the adaptation, the IL, and all that stuff. So I just wanted to touch real quick on a couple of very common ones. So Robin, if you're there, you can get to your mic. So two of the more common ones that we see, particularly in the world of transitional blindness, is Charles Bonnet syndrome, and also non-24 is a blindness-wide situation. So I'm going to let Robin talk just a little bit about Charles Bonnet syndrome, kind of what it entails, and you know, we can certainly take questions on any of that. And then, as I said, I'll talk a little bit about non-24 and kind of discuss a little bit about that as well. So, Robin?
Thank you, Brian. Now, just to connect my happy, cheery talk that I gave a few minutes ago with this not so happy talk, is that when I was growing up and when I was in college, I had absolutely no idea what Charles Bonnet syndrome was, and then I was going to get it. So that's how, if my two talks sound like they're sending a disjointed message, that's why. So Charles Bonnet syndrome is, and for those of you who have congenital blindness, you, and if you were to lose one of your other senses, you could experience the equivalent that would refer to the other sense, whatever is relevant to the other sense. So you're not excluded from this, but this is specifically for vision. So acquired vision loss. And what Charles Bonnet syndrome is, it's visual hallucinations that occur in individuals who, again, have acquired vision loss. And it occurs, it's diagnosed in people who are deemed by physicians to be otherwise, who are deemed to be psychologically, it's not a psychological disorder. So they have to first not have a psychological disorder to be diagnosed with this. And they also have to be viewed by physicians to not have, they have to be believed to not have dementia in order to be diagnosed. Now, obviously, people who have psychosis, who have schizophrenia, or who have dementia, such as Alzheimer's, they could also have acquired vision loss and therefore have Charles Bonnet syndrome as well, but they wouldn't be able to be officially diagnosed by a physician, is my understanding from my physicians. So there are various categories of Charles Bonnet syndrome. The first is the appearance of the hallucinations. So they are broken into, the physicians break them into two main groups. The one are simple, referred to as simple, and a example of one would be seeing flashing lights. In my case, it looks like fireworks. And then the second are the complex hallucinations, and those can present as people, they're fully formed, they're referred to by doctors as fully formed visual hallucinations. So they can be people, they can be images of flowers, they can be moving, or they can be stationary. They can be of houses and so forth. And they can last for a few seconds to days or weeks, or not resolve at all, depending on the person's situation. And then the other ways in which they are categorized, the main ways, is how the person experiencing them perceives them. So, for instance, if someone is a pacifist, a nonviolence advocate, and they see violent images, then that's the psychiatrists, they refer to those as ego dystonic hallucinations. And then there are ego syntonic hallucinations, which means that they are they're not antithetical to a person's their ideology. And then there are the neutral hallucinations that the psychiatrist that they refer to. And the neutral are just what it sounds like. They're visual hallucinations that the person having them neither perceives as bad or good. They're just simply there. They're just simply aware of them. And also another key point in being diagnosed with Charles Bonnet syndrome is that the patient has to have its, doctors refer to it as insight. They have to be aware that what they're seeing is not real. They have to be able to differentiate the hallucinations from objective reality. Does anybody have any questions about that before I talk about briefly things that one can do that have been found to help in some cases?
Loma?
Aloma?
Yeah, I have a question. So this would fall in the line of the neuropsychiatric profession?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
This is a neuro, yeah, okay.
But it's not a psychiatric disorder, because if it were, then one would be diagnosed with psychosis and not Charles Bonnet syndrome.
That's right.
Okay.
So just Robin, Brian, just real quick. So one of the questions some of you may be having is why would we even bring this particular disorder up in this context? And the simple answer is this. One of the things that at least I know, and I grant you my experiences have been a little bit more limited than some, Aloma, I'm looking at you. But one of the things that I have come across is that I found that the more that I start to talk to people, okay, as we've noted many times in this presentation already, there are a large group of shared experiences that people have, okay? But one of the things that I have also encountered in my travels and in my experiences is that certain experiences, aside from the blindness, which is blatantly obvious in many cases, certain experiences, such as this one, people keep very, very close to the chest. And the reason why that is because there is a lot of discrepancy in the diagnosis, or in more accurate terms, the misdiagnosis of Charles Bonnet syndrome. Many of you that have sight probably noticed that while Robin was talking about some of the visual hallucinations, specifically the simple tear hallucinations, the lights and stuff, I kind of pointed at myself. One of the things that I noted very early on with my retinitis pigmentosa is that I saw an overabundance of what I like to call onboard fluorescent lights. In other words, she talked about fireworks or something that was akin to a firework. I have a lot of lights that like to swoop around that look like bent fluorescent bulbs. And sometimes they swoop around, sometimes I just get flashes, sometimes I get things like that. And I know, I mean, I figured out pretty early on that, hey, I know that's not real. I know that's not something going on. It's something going on with my eyes. But it wasn't until much, much later that I came to understand kind of what visual hallucinations were, kind of what was involved with it. But as I started talking to some other people, I came across a few people that had more complex visual hallucinations that, quite frankly, were frightened to tell anybody, because when they would tell those, outside of the blindness community, and with many of which had no contact prior to the blindness community, they were under the assumption, or they had suggested, that perhaps there was something going on psychologically. So there was this conflict with the individual saying, okay, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with me, and yet these people are telling me that, I'm going, I'm losing my mind. And so they just kind of keep it to themselves. But I had one person in particular who had told me that it was very, very frightening, and that, they really didn't know, how to handle it, or where to go, or what to do. And so as I started researching it, I came to realize that it's a lot more common than people in the blindness community proper and abroad realize as well. So just kind of one of the reasons why I think it's important to talk about, that one in particular, and as well as the one that I'll talk about. But I'll let Robin kind of go on with her thing for a few more points out there.
Thanks, Brian. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. And if I'm going too fast, please let me know. Please feel free to interrupt. So some of the suggestions that ophthalmologists, low vision specialists, and psychiatrists that I've spoken with about interventions that can help, and some of which I found to be particularly helpful. Foremost for me, and apparently the neurological reason for this is that the brain can only focus on a limited number of things at once. So for me, if I'm talking, like for instance, right now, I'm not having visual hallucinations because I'm so focused on talking to all of you, that my brain is focused on that and not on the visual hallucinations themselves, producing them. And also some, if staying focused, if that doesn't help, some people who have Charles-Bonnet syndrome have reported that changing the lighting in their environment, either making it brighter or darker, can also have a positive effect and reduce the hallucinations. And if all of that doesn't work, and if someone is having disturbing hallucinations that they just feel that they want to try pharmaceuticals, there have been some limited trials of, and none of these are all what's called off-label uses for these medications. But there are seizure meds that have helped. Some people have reported that they've helped them. Some people have reported that anti-anxiety medications, various types, have helped. But again, doctors normally will save medical interventions to be a last resort, because obviously when someone starts manipulating their neurotransmitters, it can have a disastrous, potentially disastrous effect on their life, both at the present and perhaps long term, depending on the side effect. And if you just really quick want to know specifically about the part of the brain where they believe the hallucinations are caused, they believe that the lack of visual stimulation disinhibits neurons in the visual cortex, the part of the brain that processes vision. And specifically, neuroscientists believe that it's the 16, 17, and 18. Those are the regions where they believe that the simple hallucinations are caused, and then they believe that the complex ones originate in the 19th. And the reason that they think that's the reason, those are the regions of the brain, is because when they've done awake brain surgery on patients who have brain tumors in that area, they will stimulate those areas of the brain so that they're not removing, when they remove a tumor, they're not removing critical areas of the brain that the person needs to function normally. So when they stimulate those areas of the brain, the patients report having the types of hallucinations that I've described. And if you like more information about this, obviously contact your own doctors and mental health professionals, but also you can go to NIH. They have resources. They have a link to the Charles Bonnet Syndrome Foundation website. I think it's a great website. My mother's visited it, and she also thinks it's a great website because they have simulations of what patients have reported their hallucinations look like to them. And so it's a great way to show your family and friends what, things that are similar to what you may be seeing. And the Charles Bonnet Syndrome Foundation is located in Australia, but again, it has a website that's easily accessible.
Right. And I would just add to that as well, we also have links and resources available through our network as well for that particular thing. Very good. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
So we'll take questions if anybody has any, but I wanted to touch real quick on just one other one that's a particularly common one too. And I'm not going to go deep into like in depth to it because it actually is pretty simple at its very essence. And the other one that many of you probably have heard commercials about or seen things on TV because it's a little more widely known and a little bit more publicly acknowledged than Charles Bonnet syndrome is non-24. Basically, the essence of the non-24 is, as I mentioned before, it is a supplementary disorder that comes as a direct result of vision loss or non-vision. And essentially, going back into the whole neuroscience aspect again, long and short of it boils down to the idea that as human beings, we have neurotransmitters of varying types within our brain. And one of the neurotransmitters that we utilize, and many people don't even realize it, is the neurotransmitter melatonin. And for those of you that may not be aware, basically melatonin is our happy, sleepy drug that our brain naturally distributes through our bodies. And the main way that melatonin is triggered is through the variations and the cycles of the day to day. So the sun, sun up, sun down, darkness, and that kind of thing. And again, as you can probably imagine, folks that have low vision or no vision naturally would have a more difficult time perceiving that because that type of perception is done visually. So as a result, a larger and larger number of people, it seems, after going through and looking at studies through their doctors and various professionals, they have come to understand that many people that exhibit sleeping disorders that also are blind are doing so as due in part to a lack of melatonin distribution within the brain. And just like with Charles Bonnet syndrome, there are a large number of things that people can do to try and help alleviate that. Everything from just taking a simple melatonin supplement to certain techniques to sleep aids, although people do have to be careful with sleep aids because they can be, you can develop an addiction to certain ones. So that's another big one that people deal with. And oftentimes, because it is a relatively new disorder in terms of the diagnostic principles, that many people are not really knowledgeable about or have never heard about, or just kind of, just unaware that such a thing even exists. And that's just something, or another example of supplementary things that come out there, which again, rolling back to the whole idea of advocacy and adaptation, we talk about the idea of knowing oneself and understanding that if something doesn't feel right, that you do need to reach out and you do need to find resources and be able to look for help in those particular situations. And it's not just limited to the blindness. Sometimes it is other things that come as a result of it. So so all very, very good things. So does anybody have any questions regarding either the Charles Bonnet or the non-24 that we could address now, or if not, we can hit them.
Loma.
Loma, yes, ma'am.
I always have questions. I just wanted.
That's good.
I just wanted to point out that non-24 at one time was thought to be pretty much exclusive to people who were born totally blind. And
correct.
That's not that they're finding that not to be the case.
That is not true. That's correct. Yeah. That is absolutely correct. Other questions, comments? Anything else to throw out?
I can tell you a funny story.
Well, sure. Why not? We got time for one. Why not?
Well, no, I don't. I'm not trying to interfere. I'm not trying to take over.
Please.
But I'm sorry, but Robin's hallucinogenics reminded me of something that I must tell you, because it also goes to how far people will go to avoid being blind. So let me explain this real quickly here. I was asked to be on a national panel one time and I didn't do the medical piece of it, but the testing piece. But there were a variety of individuals of different ages and things from around the country who were asked to wear a particular type of simulation inducing glasses kind of thing. They may have had some low vision and this was supposed to enhance it and stimulate it and so on and so on and so on. Well, then they went from basically being nearly totally blind to what they thought was going to be, oh, I'm just legally blind now, so I can get this vision back. And of course, everybody thought that was a great idea for them, until and I was there basically to say it doesn't work that easily. I was sort of the calming person that says, no, just because you got some vision or whatever, you're still a blind person. So I was trying to keep their feet both on the ground, instead of letting them go overboard and thinking that this was going to be the end all and the cure all. So that's the background. So the point of this is, one day we're having this national conference call, and there's a guy in California who is absolutely thrilled because he says, I can see, this is really, really, really helping me. I can see now things I couldn't see before, and I'm so happy. And now when I look outside, I can see trees. I can look at trees. And then he said, they're upside down and blue, but I can see the trees.
Wow.
And I thought I'd rather not be having to go around seeing upside down blue trees in my vision path.
Wow.
But
There's a
he
certain
thought it was
Beatles song that comes to mind here.
he thought it was great because by golly, it was giving him vision, you know?
Wow.
Jeez. I'll never
Living the
forget
world through
him.
Spider-Man's eyes.
Whew.
Everything's upside down. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That's great. Thank you,
He
Alona.
thought seeing the trees was great. Well, they're upside down and blue, but I can see them.
Well, and again, it kind of in its own way works itself back to this whole idea of perception. You know, how do
Yeah.
we perceive the world? In what ways, in what ways can we control our perception of the world? And what ways do we need to adapt our perceptions of the world? I mean, it's yeah, that's a very subjective thing that we could go on and on and on about for a long time. So does anybody else have any questions or anything before we move on to the next category? And again, if anybody does, please feel free to jump in. We will take questions at any time. So, all right, very good. Well, all that leading up into our final talking point of the night. So again, we talked about kind of the inner conflict and kind of taking that and turning it outwards, and then what we would do going outwards and how to push forward once we've come to terms with it. Obviously, to most of us here, the most common thing that our chapter in particular kind of tends to run into as the number one approach subject of blindness in terms of what people are trying to adapt to is independent living. All of us live in a little bit of different circumstances. Some of us live alone, some of us are married, some of us have houses, some of us live in retirement communities, but all of us inherently want kind of the same thing. One of the most common things that I hear, and I'm sure my colleagues would echo this as well, is that, I'm scared to death of going blind because I'm scared to lose my independence. That's the number one thing that I hear when I talk to people, whether they're blind, whether they're not blind, but that, they're giving their perceptions of blindness. And ironically, I've found just through personal experiences and kind of playing off the experiences of others that, believe it or not, independent living is actually one of those areas that is most adaptable in the blindness world. So with that being said, I'm going to turn this over to my friend, Mr. Legates, and his wife, Ninette, to kind of talk a little bit about some of their experiences and a little bit more about the broader spectrum of independent living. So, Gary.
Man, the myth, the legend.
That's right.
We may,
Man who needs no introduction.
We may also ask our friend Marge to speak on a little bit of this, because she's a person who I think has done very well at adapting with a sight loss and has really kept going. So we'll get to her in just a minute. But if she's still here. But I want you to imagine this scenario. Here are two kids out of college, madly in love, have been apart because we live in different parts of the state. There's no good transportation. We don't have cell phones or anything like that, text messaging. These two kids are madly in love and they want to get married. But people say, oh, well, how are you? It's really hard. How are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? How can you live independently? What happens if you have a child? And that was us. These are the kids we're talking about, but we got married anyway. But just some things that we encountered as we were getting ready to get married, some things that we remember going through, and we sort of took notes on these, and you can ask us questions about them. But first of all, don't let people make you think being independent is more difficult than it is. Yes, it's hard. You've got to know some things. You've got to do some things. And it occurs to me that Ninette and I were opposite of some of you who are in the call today, who know how to do a lot of things because you could see to do them, but now you've lost your sight and the blindness is what's bothering you. The blindness is what's bothering you. In our case, we were used to the blindness. That didn't bother us at all. It was knowing how to do things that bothered us. For example, I remember not long before I got married, my father showed me how to slice a tomato. I'd never done that before because it was always done for me at home. I learned to make meatloaf. My mother showed me how to do that, and Ninette knew it long before I did, but she showed me how to do it because I'd never done that type of thing. So things can be done. It's not impossible. There are many blind people who have done it, and it can be done, and it's not the impossible dream. Did you want to say anything, dear?
I know we're coming from a different perspective from the people who have lost their vision later in life. But there are some things that are the same for both of us. And I would say some of those are just to know when a need does arise, to know to find out what resources are available to meet it. And also not to get discouraged by what Gary was talking about, these limited expectations. Maybe it's somebody else's limited expectation, or maybe your own. Maybe you think something just seems impossible. And even the fact that there's not just one way to do something. The way that you have done it, if you've had vision, the way that you've done it in the past might not be possible for you once you have lost a fair amount of vision. And so you may have to use your hands more to show you where something is or how to perform a certain function. And
a good example of that, Ninette, is the lady that came to you and who had gone blind and wanted to know how to plug a plug in. And Ninette showed her the way to do it.
Receptacle, and into an outlet. And of course, sometimes you can explain something, and sometimes you actually have to have a hands-on experience where you say, well, this is what you do, and let me show you. And sometimes too, and I don't know if I would think about this if I were just losing my vision, but maybe ask others how they handle similar issues. People who are in a similar situation to the situation that you're in, maybe their visual acuity is similar to yours, and they might have figured something out that they could help you with whatever that is that has come up.
That's one thing we were thinking about when we were getting married. We did not know any other blind couples except for one that Ninette was corresponding with. But we knew very, very little of other blind people who were going through this. Now we know several. Don't be afraid to ask us, blind people, that is. Don't be afraid to ask people who are going through the same thing you are, how they do things. I've found most of them are extremely willing to help you. And we wish we had that, because it really would have lessened our anxiety to have someone like that.
Of course, communication is a lot different today, so it's easy to check things out. Of course, we came from the days, as many other people on here, we came from the days when phone calls out of the immediate area were expensive. And so you didn't just pick up the phone and call anyone you wanted to talk to at any time. Another thing I've thought, sometimes you get like misinformation or incorrect information about whether something will work out or whether you could use a particular equipment or appliance or whatever. And you can't always base it. You might base what you can do on somebody else's success, but try not to base it on someone else's failure, because you really don't know until you try it.
An example of that was when we were first getting married, people said, oh, if you put your clothes in the dryer, they'll shrink. And that we know two blind people to this very day who were scared off from ever putting their slacks in the dryer because their parents had told them it would shrink them. Well, yeah, it does shrink them some, but there are ways around it. If you really think it's going to shrink them,
Well, I've never had that happen.
hang them up.
honestly.
Learn how to hang them up.
I've actually never had that experience. I
So-
can't think of anything that's happened to. I suppose maybe to some extent, maybe because materials are different today, and things like that. But you almost have to have the experience yourself and find out what works and what doesn't, and not just be scared off from something by another person. I wrote down a few things, such as use helpful equipment. If you find out there's equipment available, or maybe you don't know if certain equipment is available, so you ask, well, what would you use to do something? There are all kinds of cutting tools that are specialized, and maybe not everyone is going to like the same one. But it was kind of interesting because my mother, who was just scared to death for me to be on my own and didn't go through any concerted plan of teaching me, even though I did learn some things along the way, but it wasn't what you would call an effort like where in education, you have a plan. There was no plan for this. But then once she found out that somehow I had the cooking gene, which no one ever figured that out, even me. So then she started finding me things. She would buy me stuff. It was just remarkable. I really wish that she had done that, sooner.
Well, you're talking about things. The air fryer is one of the greatest pieces of equipment that has been developed today. Any of you could use it safely. The microwave, once you figure out how to deal with it, with labeling it or marking it, it's a good piece of equipment. Anyone can use it, whether you have sight or not.
And of course, there are all kinds of labeling issues, because whether you know Braille or not is significant. But if you don't know Braille, there are solutions, there are answers. And again, it's this issue about finding the resources that you might need. And that is a networking matter. Or of course, there are catalogs, there are online resources where you can look things up. Some people are not going to be, it's not going to be possible for some people to do that. So this is where the networking comes in, of talking to other people, and they can give you the address, the phone number, whatever you might need.
Is Marge still on?
Let's see if I can find that out.
Anyway, I was going to.
Marge?
No, I guess not.
I had a feeling that
we'll bring her on some other time. I just want to stop and let you all ask us questions. We've been married for 3 years. We've been living together. We've been, we have a house. We had apartments.
Let me just say, what? I don't think so.
Can you still hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Someone talked earlier about planning ahead, and I just wanted to reiterate that, because there are times that we don't always know what's coming up, but sometimes we do. And if you know what's coming up, you can plan accordingly. And you might need to enlist. There are times we might need to enlist some help with something, and you already know you're going to need help with that. And memorize. There are things that you can memorize, so that if you have trouble with labeling, there may be times when you can memorize the order. You might be able to just arrange things in such a way that you know where they are. So memorize and organize, things like that. And I think I said that. I was trying to think. I'd like to, if I had more time, I'd try to put in some examples here, such as that matter about there's not just one way to do something. There can be.
Well, like when her parents lived out in the country, and so they used to, burn their own trash and stuff. And Ninette was really worried, because she said, "How am I going to burn my own trash?" Well, we've never had to burn our trash because we live in the city. We've always lived in a rural area, but they've always
More
collected
urban,
our trash.
yeah.
So that was something that we worried about, but it turned out not to be a difficult thing.
And don't be embarrassed about what you don't know. I mean, there's probably somebody you're comfortable talking with. Maybe there may be some people it doesn't work for you to ask that question or tell that story or whatever, but there probably is someone. I have found a couple things that I think are very useful. It can be, when you use one of those really high-powered vacuums, sometimes you pick up things that you really don't want to have damaged, or you don't want to damage the vacuum. So I have more than one actually, cordless vacuums that really do pick up a lot. Gary has a guide dog, and it picks up a lot of that, guide dog fur, that dog fur, or even kitty cat fur, or even my hair, or whatever. But that's a helpful tool, I think. And you might not know about it unless you ask somebody, well, is there maybe a simple way to do some of this cleaning? And another thing that I have found for people who don't use iPhones and don't use some of the technology, there are some simple recording devices that can help for taking notes. And they look like something that would have been useful for me in another situation. And of course, we do have the technology, but not everyone is going to be able to invest in that, or is going to want to get involved in learning to use it, because it can get pretty complex if you haven't done that. And then you get to this point and you think, well, I think I need to find some easier solution. I guess the only other thing I wanted to say is, really, I can't tell you how many times I have asked the Lord for a solution, for an answer. It might be something as simple as, I dropped that, where is it? How am I going to find it? And I've actually used, and so I do praise God for all those answers, but sometimes I'll use a cane, to look around for something. If you, there are times that, maybe you can't reach under something and push the item out that must be there. But a cane will work, not just for mobility, but for something like that.
Shown his iPad and left the meeting.
Yeah, what questions do you guys have to ask us, if any? Several of you have been to our house, so if you think, you might get on there and say, man, they're really bad, don't even ask them.
Well, I'm not sure you still
No,
have
just
too
kidding.
many people.
Yeah.
But I was also going to mention Maryland. I tend to get this wrong, so let's see. Technology
Assistance Program,
TAP.
MDTAP.
Maryland TAP.
MDTAP.
Because it can be a really good resource, because they do have both high-tech and low-tech items that you can get on loan, or there's even a program. Wait, I'm trying to think what that is, what you call that. A loan program for purchasing as well. So I don't want to get my loans and my loans mixed up here, but they're very good to talk to. I think they'd be very helpful. It might be a matter of just, you might have to have someone go and get the item for you, or find a way to get there. And of course, we didn't even talk about the real offending issue, which is, maybe we touched on a little bit, transportation. That's
We could have a whole workshop
Yeah.
on that, because it's another matter.
Mental note. This is Brian. I do have something if you guys could touch on perhaps a little bit. I'm curious that, because you guys obviously are homeowners, and moving into a home, being a married couple, things like that, going into it, how much did you plan ahead in kind of how you wanted to set up your home environmentally? How did you have a plan of attack? Can you touch on that a little bit, as far as labeling, how you organize things? what did you guys do ahead of time, or was it more of a wing it type situation?
As far as setting up our home, in both cases, especially the second time, because we've been in two different homes, we had very good help. We had almost we had a relative who was almost like an interior decorator. Now, she knew what we liked, she knew what we had, she knew how our house was set up, and she pretty much figured out how to do it. And of course, if we hated it, she'd change it. But I mean, she did a fantastic job.
But to Brian's point, there were a number of things that weren't actually included in the, you wouldn't really call them decorations, but some things that would be useful, such as bars and hooks and shelves that weren't in places where I really like to have them. And so actually, apparently I made myself quite clear on those matters, because when it was finished, they were there and they were in the right places, and they were perfectly executed. So yes, we did do some of that.
And labeling, we did label our thermostat. Of course, now you have these iPhone thermostats and stuff, but we did label our thermostats. We did label our stove at that time. We didn't have microwave. We did label our washing machine, I think. Yeah, we did. And so we did have to do that ourselves. We just had to get people to read them to us. It was when you first move into a house, you almost have to have pretty dedicated help for a day. And then after that, you can do it.
Just a little tidbit. This was interesting to me, and I don't know what this would be like for someone with very low vision who has been able to see for most of a lifetime. But one of the things that really concerned people who knew us was, how are you going to find your way around the house? They really concerned about this orientation issue. And of course, for us, we've always been learning our way around places since, we really don't even remember when we first started learning to do that. It was just a natural process that we went through. So it kind of tickles me a little bit, because some things concerned me, but that wasn't one of them. But that was the thing that concerned people who were not visually impaired.
Yeah, because we learned our way around our house in no time. I mean, no time, really. We never ran into walls, I don't think, or anything like that. No.
So we probably don't have too many people left by this point.
Anything else anybody wants to ask? If not, we'll turn it over to Brian.
Chris, I knew you knew I would have a question. I actually have two, even as many times as I've been to your house, which I need to do again soon. First, Ninette, where do you get your recipes now? And second, when you're cleaning, I know you have a cleaning lady now, but if you're cleaning surfaces like, say, the bathroom counters or the tub, or maybe I don't know, dusting floors or something, where it's hard to feel where that you've gotten everything. How do you make sure that you've gotten the dust or whatever thing you're trying to get off of that surface when you can't really feel it?
Well, a lot of things you can feel. I'm not going to say that, a person couldn't come and see something and say, well, you missed that. But really, my experience is that a lot of things you can feel, like for example, in the bathroom, you can feel a toothpaste smear or something like that, right? You can feel if some lotion has been spilled, or say some kind of shaving product or whatever. You can feel that surface and know that needs some attention. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
Well, I know that part. What I was thinking about was more of dust, or I found that
Well,
found out.
dust gets
Yeah.
dust gets cleared out pretty easily. It responds very well to a dust cloth.
Brian, when you want to get a minute, can I throw something in there if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things, kind of to your question, Chris, regarding like how to do something like one of the things that I've done, and my landlord has complimented me multiple times on the cleanliness of my house compared to some of her sighted tenants. And she asked me one time, she says, you know, what do you have somebody come in and clean it? And I was like, no, I don't have anybody comes in and cleans. And she's like, well, then how do you do it? You know, you can't see how you do it. And I basically told her, I said, it basically comes down to it, the idea of the broader area effect. So in other words, don't look at it from a position when you clean something as much as, okay, I need to hone in on a specific spot, but be thorough, you know, go over the entirety of an area and then go over it again. And more often than not, as long as you're not, you know, phoning it in, you're going to get the vast majority of things. And like Ninette said, a lot of that stuff, even dust, you can kind of run your fingers along it and feel the difference in the tactfulness of the wood or whatever might be on it. I have a lot of knickknacks, so I do a lot of dusting, and it's a lot of intricately detailed type of things. And it really does. Same thing with cleaning a bathtub or something like that. I know one of the scourges of my existence is calcium because we live in city water, and it's just, there's no getting around it. You can put all the water softeners out there, you're going to get it. So first of all, of course, it's about finding the right solution as far as what you're going to spray on the tub. But more importantly, it's just about being thorough and covering the entirety of something. So when I spray something down, again, I'm not just looking around the basin, the drain, the hot button areas. I'm going everywhere. I'm letting the stuff kind of do its thing. And then when I go back and I wipe it, I'm just being very, very thorough and going over it and then running my hands over it again. And if I see a spot, I might say a cuss word or two, but I'm back there scrubbing it, putting the elbow grease into it. And it's just, that's a lot of it. Because and I'm glad you bring that question up. One of the things that I also hear from people is either I had a friend who's blind or I know somebody that's blind and they don't clean because they say they can't because they're blind, which absolutely drives me up the wall because it literally is the biggest misnomer out there, in that you can do this stuff if you want to do it. And as far as I'm concerned, it really boils down to the same type of situation as a sighted person. Is it that they just don't want to do it because they're lazy or they don't like to clean or whatever the case may be? More often than not, I feel like that's the underlying issue, not the vision loss.
We've talked to some other blind people, and we do have a cleaning lady that comes once every 2 weeks. And other blind people have said they do the same, and that's good because it just checks up on you. Like, it's like saying, okay, maybe you did miss this, but this way at least you can kind of have a check on you once every 2 weeks to make sure that things are.
But if I didn't have that person, I think what I would do is I would continue to do the things that I do, and then I would probably do some additional things. And then if someone that I felt comfortable about asking was in the house, I would just say, tell me if there's something that needs attention. If you see something like, you may not always remember to get above the table and wipe off the light fixture or that sort of thing. So it might be, you might want someone to point out to you if they see some glaring issue. But if you can't depend on that, you just do the best you can. It's not, it's not that someone's going to be checking up on you. And have an orderly system for how you do it. So if you vacuum or whatever you're doing, you start in a particular spot and you just keep going until you've covered what you're quite certain is the whole area. And mostly it'll be close enough anyway. And you asked about recipes. Well, I of course I write things down a lot because I use Braille. I have a number of cookbooks, which you may or may not realize, but I have a number of those in Braille. But of course you can get, there are other formats that you can get cookbooks in. I don't usually do that, but you can. And I've had a number of recipes dictated to me because, someone else cooked that and I wanted to know what the recipe was. So I wrote it down from dictation, that sort of thing. Of course, somebody can email me a recipe or I can email them a recipe. That's a great thing. And, there's any number of ways to find recipes. We know, goodness, almost any service where you have people talking about cooking or talking about household concerns, there'll probably be something about cooking on there where people are sharing it.
There is a very good cookbook that has been available for years, and I think it still is in Braille. If you can get it, it's called Cooking Without Looking. And it was written for blind people. And who puts that out?
Well, the printing house did bring it back for a while. And I don't know how, that was quite some time ago. But the way people sell things now, or give them away, you almost could find, like on some swap shop or something, you could probably find it if you needed it.
Have you ever used, or do you use Alexa for recipes?
Actually, yes. I've tried to. I will say I haven't been terribly successful because I haven't figured out yet how to get both the ingredients and the instructions just to read through the way I want them. She asks you too many questions and you want to continue to the next step or whatever, and pretty much I'm not going to say I haven't. I'm trying to think if I ever.
You have used it.
I have tried, but mostly it hasn't been real successful for me personally. So
one time you tried to use her and it seemed like she stopped in the middle of the recipe and you couldn't. Yeah. It's hard to get her to start up again or something.
Yeah, I don't find that to be the best answer. Let's put it that way. It's a solution, but that's not the best one for me personally.
Good. Cool. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments for Gary and Ninette? Sign with my phone. Okay. Well, does anybody have any other questions regarding any of the material that was covered tonight? I know we went over a lot of stuff. Anybody want to swing back into any previously covered material before we wrap up?
Just for public information, my name is Derek Day. I am here, and if anyone has any questions, I can help to answer anything.
Hi, Derek.
Hello.
Yeah. Talkie. Well, one thing I would like to add, just kind of relating to the independent living aspect, again, talking about cooking and recipes and things like that. The one good thing about the technology, and Ninette and Gary and Chris kind of cited this, is there is just a wealth of ways to pull things up. I mean, websites have a virtually unlimited number of different things out there. I know for myself, regarding the question with Alexa, I have tried it. The thing that I still am kind of curious about is, like Ninette was talking about, the steps and kind of how they work through it. If there's a certain time limit when the individual steps, like you were saying, how it asks you if you want to continue on or not. I've actually just taken more to pulling them up on my phone and actually just doing it that way. So.
Brian, it's Aloma.
Yes, Aloma.
I'd like to know if you rent yourself out for hire to come clean.
For the right price and the transportation.
The little elves are just not doing their job like they used to.
He pays in food or drinks or both.
Yeah.
Oh, I could do that. That's not a problem.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Okay. Does anybody have anything else before we wrap it up?
This has been really, really detailed and productive.
Yes. Yes, it has. Well, I would like to personally thank everybody who participated, spoke, got on the call tonight. I know a few folks had to drop out a little early. I'm going to remind folks that we will have multiple resources for the recording of this particular thing. So if some folks weren't able to make it through the rest of the way, it will be available in electronic format for people to go back over. I'd also like to add that we kind of touched on this in the beginning, but also through the course of our meetings. One of the key goals to kind of having this conversation was to kind of also gauge sort of a jumping off platform for future endeavors with our chapter as far as where folks would like us to take workshops, what particular facets of blindness they would like to focus in on, to learn more about, to kind of get a better handle on. So one of the things that I would like for folks to take away from all of this, aside from the fact that we threw a whole heap of information at you, and I honestly don't know any other way to really kind of skate around that, but just to kind of start thinking about your particular situations, kind of where you are with things, how you're adapting to your particular situation, and what facets of it you're having great successes with, because we want to know those things. And also conversely, the specific facets that you are maybe struggling a little bit or providing a challenge. I know a number of you I work with one-on-one, technology is a big one. And, I'm sure that's going to be a big one for a lot of folks for quite a while, because technology is ever evolving. So, but it doesn't have to be that. I mean, we've talked about some independent living stuff. We can go into greater detail on some of the things that we touched on, like cleaning. I mean, I'd be more than happy to give a demonstration, on the things that I can do, or, I know Ninette is an excellent
in my
cook.
bathroom?
Yeah, in your bathroom. Oh, so that's what it has to be, huh? On site. So, I mean, those are the type of things that
out in the
we
field,
want folks
working
to
out
kind
in
of
the
take
field.
away from this. That's right. That's right. Taking it out in the field trip.
Except
So
she
that's
doesn't
kind
have
of what
AC.
I'm hoping that folks take away.
No.
Oh,
That's
well,
right.
then we'll have to wait till
Yes.
Thanksgiving. Or
Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, I think I think that's the biggest thing I'd like people to take away. So with that, if nobody else has any other questions or comments or anything like that, I would like to express my gratitude and thanks again to everybody that participated. And we look forward to speaking with you guys in the future.
This is a great chapter project, you guys. Good for all of you.
Thank you.
And thanks for letting us piggyback and share.
Yes, this was very helpful. Mom and I